Tonight we have a very special guest, and she will be talking to and telling us about what needs to be improved as well as what exists in the world of sexuality.
Okay, Julie, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to speak, but I just wanted to add something. Um, I would like to look at it as a sex worker as you would look at colonialism, um, colonialism and black, brown, every other color, the other colors other than white, who have been persecuted. It goes back to the same thing with sex workers, LBGT, all this, because up until the 1200s or the medieval time, it wasn't a big thing to be a homosexual or lesbian or whatever, because it was still a part of life. Even in your indigenous people of the land, they had one, two, they had more than five, six, seven genders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sex, and they even had gods who were gods who were specific for non-procreative sex. So sexuality to me is what the issue is. When we start curing sexuality, is how we're going to get to this point, because we can't criminalize the men either, because not all men are doing that.
Well, I'm just so glad we're having this conversation, because it's so often just screaming at each other and not listening. And I so appreciate this dialogue. So thank you again. I just want to speak to a couple of things. First of all, that Tina said. Obviously, when you use terms like the toxic touch, it just makes me think about the misogyny towards the women or any person selling sex, when that's an abhorrence. And the toxic touch is the touch of the police officer, obviously, the touch of the violent John, and not from her ever, or any prostituted person. And I suppose I should have said in my introduction about my position on this. In terms of the law, I'm really well aware of what goes on in the States. It's unbelievably horrific that prostituted people, or sex workers, whichever terminology we wish to use, are criminalized ever, in any way, under any circumstances.
Yeah, they
And
do the
whether
same here. They do the same here. They
yes,
oftentimes, you will see
yeah,
in TV
Okay.
raids, they have these young women. So many of them are Nepali girls, Tibetan girls. Police
Okay.
just
We
goes
want
and
to,
picks them
I'm
up.
sorry,
In
Tina.
Kamatipuram, they pay
sure.
these girls for nothing. And they have bed bugs, because I went in. They have bed bugs.
Tina,
It's
Tina,
horrific.
Tina, sweetie. Okay, we're going to let her finish talking and then you go. Okay? Go ahead, Julie.
Yes, and I spent time in the court, in the Queen's district, trafficking courts, where they're still criminalising the people in prostitution who are arrested from the brothels, and their pimps stand outside in the court waiting to just put them back, straight on the game again. And it's an abhorrence, and it shouldn't happen in any country anywhere. And if I had one wish, and I could just have what I wanted in terms of the human rights relating to the entire global sex trade, before any buyer is criminalized, I would say decriminalize all the prostituted people, every single person selling sex, everywhere in the world. It never works. It's a human rights violation of the worst example. And it's ineffective in the extreme. But I also want to just say something that Tina said about the women here and now in Sonagachi, wherever, because obviously there's a huge amount of poverty in the sex trade, as everyone knows, and a huge amount of coercion. And what I think is a human rights approach to women who cannot feed their children or themselves and are in the here and now, well, two things. First of all, offer any harm reduction, harm minimization that that person wants and needs and that person asks for. Ideology should never, ever come before the safety of the person selling sex. And the second thing is something that a sex trade survivor colleague of mine said that I used in the book in response to Kenneth Roth, who is the very highly paid, white, privileged head of Human Rights Watch, who, when Amnesty International was arguing about whether or not it adopts a blanket policy of decriminalisation of the entire trade, clearly that means brothels and pimping as well as the person selling sex, he said, look, I understand that some people don't like prostitution, think that women are harmed by it, but why would you remove that option for, and effectively he was saying black and brown women, for whom there's no other option of making money? And my sex trade survivor colleague said, well, I think the thing to do, Kenneth, when a woman is hungry, is to put food in her mouth and not your cock. And I think that there's something to be said for that we don't take away any right or choice of a woman to earn her money in the sex trade, but we also recognise the level of coercion and poverty within that sex trade and the lack of any viable alternative.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean,
Excuse
in
me.
India, there is none.
Go ahead, mommy. Go ahead, Tina. And then
So there is just really no support. Even the NGOs that go forward, it's always about a condom or about just talking about, how to stay away from STDs or basics. There's never any psychological, spiritual, emotional support. So, even women who've come to me who've, been desperate and they just had no other way. And yes, they suffer, but again, what do they do? We are in such an exploitative system. For some people, it's just no way out. Some women have regular jobs. They still go on websites. They still get that few 1, 2, 3 sugar daddies just to tie them by so they can pay for their kids. It's come to that right now.
okay,
And the women that I talk to, they are phoning me, they are messaging me. There is no food, there are no Johns, there is nothing post COVID. There is not cam work for every girl. A lot of poor women don't even know how to get online. All they have is stand on the road and kolaba. So what do we do about that? How can we criminalize them? If they get picked up, they're going to get hurt by the police. And you spoke about that in the book, that people from economically backward or developing countries, their police is horrific. So the women forget, I am not a sex worker. If I get raped, I'm going to think 10 times before I even go to the police. So, I mean, we are living in a system that, I work in the film industry. There's so much of exploitation going on in that zone. Think about that. We've got all this Epstein and all the children and all these, like, can you imagine what they're doing? Adrenochrome, they hunt. So I mean, this is like stuff that a normal person like me can't even think of.
okay.
So all I can think of is in some way finding a safe haven for these women, so they don't have to stand on the street. They have food. So, to me, that it always boils down to this, that there will be women who will do it. There will be women who will push to do it. Some of them by necessity, some of them by karma is what I call it, because they are reincarnated. For instance, I think Ckiara, because she is so secure in what she does. In a sense, she is probably reincarnated. I believe in reincarnation and the soul carrying on the work. So how do we define what a Tawaif did, and it's not the same as what a sex worker does today. So the whole concept has shifted from the sacred prostitutes of Greece and Rome and Sumer. It's a change. These women think
Egypt,
they have nowhere to go, nothing to do. They
Egypt,
hate them.
Africa, all those places had it. South America, Central America, all these places.
In India, we had the
Yeah,
Devdasis. We had the Devdasis.
pre-colonial times were more interested in the person's spirit than their sexuality, and that's what we've lost.
Right.
We've lost that by this uh, this hetero,
Over
the hetero,
patriarchal materialism.
the whole Eurocentric, a heterosexual,
Power.
normalcy. It's been lost there, but it's not completely lost because we know about this, and my thing is, and why I created this platform is because I want the normal public, because it is the masses and is the public that they beguile with all these stereotypes about sex workers. Because in every study, I don't care how much you to research, you don't have enough money to truly research every single sex worker, because there's at least 20 sex workers that I know who, as she say, you can say they're incarnated priestesses because they are very secure in what they're doing, but they're not ready to be me and be out with it. There is a problem with being out with it. Since I've been out with it, I've had my son torn from me for 12 years for being a sex worker. And that led me to drink, go smoke crack, go all these things. But my son, the thought of my son and me being something that is not me, led me back to where I am today. So, but in the process, when I met a lot of junkies and a lot of these people, I was talking to them and so forth, and a lot of their drug use came from being molested or some kind of abuse during childhood. The end result was prostitution to get money, and then because of the stigma that sex carries, they couldn't come out of it because now they're more ashamed because now they're in something sexual. So it's vicious. If you don't have that kind of spirit or character or whatever you want to call it, I think part of my upbringing had something to do with it being that my mom is so strong, but she's very religious. And this shamed her, but now she understands better. You understand? But by watching how this very religious woman can now have a homosexual grandson and a whore, and I mean that as beloved one, not in the ugly sense, could be her daughter and continue to do so, and she will stand by me now when she wouldn't stand by me before. But it came because I had to stand strong on what I felt, and by explaining to her and seeing her, I think that by educating the public truthfully, we can help people. But first we have to get past the stigma of sex, because that is the biggest block between any help. Because people in my industry feel ashamed of what they're doing even though they love what they're doing because of the sex stigma. Go ahead, Jill.
Well, I want to address, I really appreciate you saying that. And I also want to address this idea of criminalization, because I think criminalization feeds stigma and discrimination, right? And so if we are trying to talk, I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think that we can just ignore this idea of sacred sexuality. And I don't think that we should ignore that. And I think that criminalization in any way, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Julie. I don't think that people who choose to sell sex should ever be criminalized. I don't think that people who choose to buy sex should be criminalized. I think that if we put people in boxes and say, well, men are always violent and always trying to be exploitative. Yes, historically, in general, masculinity has been violent and exploitative, and that is a huge problem. But I don't know that the criminal boxes that we've created around prostitution are actually helping people. I think they're hindering, absolutely, the people who are choosing to sell, the sex workers. They're absolutely hurting them, and they're hurting the people who are buying and their families, the people that are choosing to buy, the clients, so to speak. they're hurting them. And so I think it's really important to look at these overlying structures that we have built that come as a product of colonization, that come as a product of patriarchy, that come as a product of misogyny and all of these things, and say, okay, how do we get back to some kind of basic trust and love and connection? And part of me honestly strongly believes that decriminalization of prostitution as a legislative policy is the closest thing that we can get to creating a space for human rights, and the closest thing that we can get for honoring individuals and the choices or lack of choices that they make. Because when things are decriminalized, then they have more options to go to the police, to go to whoever may need to be supportive, and we can start working against, it doesn't take it away 100%, but we can start working against this huge layer of stigma and discrimination, which we criminalize something that we think is wrong. We criminalize things that are immoral, and choosing to exchange sex in lots of different capacities is not necessarily immoral. And I don't have the right to tell people what is moral and immoral when they are adults and they are choosing and they are consenting, even if they're not choosing from the most best area of opportunity and privilege. I understand that, right? And I'm very privileged, so I get that. But I don't have the right to say that what you are doing is wrong and immoral. And I want to, because Julie, I know we have very different perspectives, I do want to bring this topic of criminalization up, because it's one of the things that feminists are so hugely divided on. And I think we have to be able to talk about this very truthfully and very honestly and say, how can we best support people? And for me, having been in New Zealand for 3 months and done an in-depth Fulbright study, and also just doing research and talking to people for 20 years, I feel like decrim is the closest that we can get to trying to fight some of these huge overarching injustices and problems in our society when it comes to prostitution, not everything else.
Sure. I mean, and I hear exactly what you say. And obviously, the other reason why we criminalize certain acts is harm. And of course, you know, the stigma should never be on a person selling sex. Stigma doesn't help. Stigma isn't helpful or useful for anyone. Stigmatizing a 12-year-old boy for watching porn isn't going to help. It doesn't help in any circumstance. We have to have open conversations, and we have to be sure that when we are speaking as feminists about prostitution, that we are not against sex. I mean, I come from a generation where we were really pushing for non-monogamy, for women to be able to live openly, happily and freely as lesbians, to raise our children in communes. I mean, you know,
in fact, that's what used to happen in the tantric communities, because you would just have something called shoibu vibaho, that means shiva marriage. So when a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman, or a man and a man decided to exchange energy, it was physical, it was mental, it was emotional. They lived together, and when the time was up, they, you know, say their goodbyes and then continue on in their path. So,
so you know, the feminists that Jill is talking about, that, you know, often we get grouped, lumped together, those that are for decriminalization, for criminalization rather. I think that language is a real problem, because when I talk about criminalization, and I'm not quite a prison abolitionist, but I'm a prison reformer campaigner. I have been for a long time. I would empty the prisons of almost everyone, certainly almost everyone in women's prisons, and a very big majority in men's prisons. The prison system is hideous. It's built on all kinds of grotesque prejudices and violence and abuse. But when we talk about criminalization, I don't mean putting Johns in prison. I don't mean punishment. I mean a normative deterrent, which I think we can only see as useful when we think about the sex trade, if we believe that prostitution isn't an inevitability. Now, there are two things for me here. One is exactly what you have all been saying, which is, how do we help the women here and now who are selling sex? Then there's the other issue, which is, well, there are always women who will sell sex. There are always women who will want to do this. Prostitution will always be here. Well, why? Why is that the case? Why is it that, forget the here and now, Why is it that we think that we can't imagine a world without prostitution?
May I?
Would it exist if we didn't have patriarchy? Would it exist if we didn't have misogyny?
May I? Okay. Sex is a biological function. Okay. And just like we breathe, we are thirsty. We go to the bathroom, we go pee, we go poo. That is the same thing as sex. There are manufacturers who manufacture toilet paper. Do we go arrest them because they are they are supplying the demand? Do we go kill someone who's selling bottled water because we are thirsty? Do we go arrest restaurant owners because
Can I say
they're
something?
providing food? It is to our biology, it is a biological function. Go
All right.
ahead,
I
Tina.
think that both of you are coming from a completely different ideological stance, whereas Julie, being a radical feminist, believes that inherently that prostitution is an exploitative system. So when she says that, you know, how can you imagine a world without prostitution? She's inherently talking about exploitation and violence. So, and you are coming from a completely different ideological understanding of the whole trade and your own experiences. So, you know, that's why for both of you to really understand, what do you say, Jill? Do you see what I just
No,
observed?
I agree. I mean, Julie, you haven't necessarily said how you understand prostitution, so I wouldn't necessarily want to put words in your mouth. I mean, you've said it in other ways, in other places, which I've read, but I agree. I think that there's this really challenging thing that happens when we think about sex, especially in the Western culture, because that's what I'm most familiar with, is this idea of thinking about it as a biological function, as opposed to thinking about it as something that we share. You know, Tina, you said you choose to share your energy, you share your whatever. That implies more of a partnership, as opposed to, hey, I have a need, you have a need, let's share for 10 minutes and then move on with our lives, right? Like, and I have a need for this and you have a need for this. In lots of ways, I feel like prostitution places a lot of power in the seller's hands, in the sex worker's hands, because they can say, again, choice, privilege, all of these things are super important to understand and acknowledge. But I think they're basically like, hey, I'm here for this. I have this need for money and I'm going to choose to do this. And it's not that big of a deal. A lot of people choose to engage in sex in all different kinds of ways. And it's not necessarily even without money. Right? People choose to engage in sex in lots of different ways without money, and it's not exploitative. It's just what they choose to do. So when some people choose to exchange, and I think that's sort of what, Ckiara, you're getting at with the toilet paper and the restaurant and the selling whatever it is. It's interesting. I wouldn't want to equate sex workers with toilet paper. You know what I mean? Like this need to do that, right? It's a different kind of thing, selling. So yes, I agree with you, Tina. I think it's definitely different ideological perspectives, and that's where it's a problem. It's a challenge.
Could I just say something about Ckiara's point, though? I mean, I absolutely understand that you're equating sex as a human right, as a need, like water, like breathing, like food. I don't think that sex is a human right. I don't think we have a right to sex if the other person isn't consenting. We could argue till the cows come home about consent here. That's a whole issue. But I know that we'll disagree on that within this room. But why don't as many women pay for sex as men? If it is a right and a need and something that's like eating, drinking, defecating, water.
Okay, I can answer that for you. It's it's indoctrination. Women have been taught against. Let's put it like this. You know, sex was recognized in Europe as sex workers, whores, prostitutes were recognized in Europe up until the 1400s, into the late 1400s. Okay, they were recognized, but there was a stigma there. There was a stigma. If you are to be a respectable woman or a respectable daughter, you were not to know anything about sex. You were not to think about sex. You
The
were
Western virgin whore polarity.
yeah, that's how come. Women are frustrated within themselves, because I also talk to other women who also come to me as a sex worker looking for how they can keep their marriage alive. And because I do have the whole sacred thing going, I train couples and people how to touch, how to feel themselves, but they have to learn how to touch themselves. They have to know how it feels good to them in order for them to truly enjoy, and both of them enjoy it. The woman always has an issue with accepting her feelings, her sexuality, or even talking about what makes her alive, what makes her, what arouses her. That's why women don't seek it, because
Well,
we are conditioned to be ashamed of our sexuality.
we're products of our culture. I'm a sexual health educator. In addition to one of my projects that I work on a lot is working with marginalized communities, foster youth, young girls in particular, and sexual health education, because we are educated into a world, boys are educated into a world where they think that they have the right to sex, right? And that they don't have to think about consent in general, again, right? And girls are educated and
It happened to me many, many times, when
Yeah.
I did not consent, and it happened.
and we are conditioned into saying we don't necessarily need to. We as young girls may say, oh, do I have a right to own my own sexuality? Do I have a right to say no? Do I even know what I want, what I think, what I feel, what Ckiara is saying? So I think we are all products of our culture, which is a lot of the reason why women aren't buying sex. And I know many, many women who buy sex. So
And I think women have been called whores by their partners, even if they are not sex workers. So whore and slut. I mean, I heard that word from my boyfriend when I really did not quite comprehend. You're a whore. So, I mean, this is the words they use to vilify all women. That
Yeah,
all women are in some ways a whore.
and that indoctrination is there. It's there, and I'll have to say again, it came from the Eurocentric ideology, the Islamic and Abrahamic religions that took over, who know the power of sexuality, because sex is power, and the embodiment of sex and sexuality is the feminine. Okay, and so if they can control that, and like Tina said, agriculture, they can control the world that way. Let me just point one other thing out. There's a problem with girls not knowing about their own sexuality, with not embracing their own sexuality from the time they have sexual feelings, and that's this. When a young man comes and touches her, she gets these touchy feelings and she thinks she's in love, because she doesn't know herself, and there goes your teenage pregnancy. Because she thinks she's in love because she's being touched like nothing's ever been touched, and how she has been denied to touch herself. And then you come, and here comes a young man, he touches her in a special kind of way, and she believes that's love, when all it is lust.
And what about the touch that is uninvited?
Yes.
What about when I get up on the bus and someone just, just slaps my butt? What when I'm standing on the road and someone just decides to brush past me and, maybe try to grab my tits?
That's the indoctrination. We have to get away from this indoctrination for both men and women, because it's toxic for both of us, not just women, but men. And all the other genders. It's toxic because sex is such a stigma to it, that anything sexual has to be done disrespectful or in a dirty manner. Therefore you have porn, and I have nothing against porn, but porn in itself is just a product of how we view sex, because no one has taught anyone about the sacredness of it.
Yes.
I have, from the many women in prostitution and who've left prostitution, tell me very similar stories over and over again. And I'm not talking about women chained to radiators, women who'd been trafficked, women who had been pimped at 13. I mean, some of them, of course, but women in everyday prostitution situations who say his touch is unwanted, his touch isn't of mutual satisfaction. Yes, of course, I know that there are exceptions to this, but the description of the women retreating from themselves, to deal with his one-sided sexual pleasure where he's doing things to her, not with her. And listen, I don't care if people want to have sex, 12, 13, 14 people in parks, so long as they don't get arrested, which would be a problem. Who cares who has sex how, consensual sex? This isn't a value judgment. This is about women saying it was his pleasure, his choice, he's paying the money, he does what he wants to her. And the John that sticks in my mind more than any that I've talked to and interviewed and met in brothels in New Zealand, in Nevada, and under illegal regimes as well, is when I asked if he thought that the woman that he'd just bought, had enjoyed the sex with him. Because the overwhelming response I get from women is, of course we don't enjoy the sex. And he said, why would she enjoy it? I was paying for it. This was my pleasure. She would have taken something from me. And he was a good-looking young man. He could have gone and got a date without paying for it. We know this is a stereotype of John's, that, they can't find a real date. And it just made my blood run cold. So is it really sexual liberation? Is this really about women's sexual pleasure? Or is it men's sexual pleasure and him taking what he wants because of that cash transaction?
That was
Yes,
her,
money.
that was his
Money always.
well, that was his and her experience.
Right.
I'm going to tell you something, yeah, because I thoroughly enjoy myself and I get a cash for tip because I have absolutely no problems orgasming. Maybe that's my perverted mind, or maybe it's my openness to my own sexuality. But every person has a different story in this, but we have to, I agree that we have to get away from harm reduction. Get into to getting harm reduction, but I don't agree with putting us all together based on some people's ideas of it, because I have a lot of clients who are comeback clients who are the only people I'm seeing now because I know them, and they've never treated me in any other kind of way. There are lots of men who want to please women. There's lots of men who are who don't who see it like I see it, who aren't really tripping off of it. And it's also up to the woman, to be honest with you. It's also up to the seller to stand their guard and say, this is what I want and this isn't what I want. And then it comes around and it turns around and it goes back to the shaming. I'm doing something I'm ashamed of. I'm dirty. I'm this. So I don't have the right. Let him just give me the cash. If we undirtify sex, people will talk and be like, look, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. It's the same thing like if you get somebody working at McDonald's and somebody starts yelling at them. They're not going to sit up there and stand it for very long. But then again, their job doesn't have the stigma that sex jobs do.
And undirtify sex work, exactly. Not just sex, but sex work.
Yes.
But like, it can't be like working in McDonald's, though. It has to be sacred. That's what I feel, that if these girls, if they're going to do it, then each interaction, they have to prepare for mind, body, soul, because when you exchange energy with someone, you're sharing your whole aura, your whole vibe with them, So I think it's a lot about the women and how they've prepared themselves and with what mentality they're approaching this field of work. That's what I have observed talking to different types of sugar babies, strippers in New Zealand, Australia. So, my Facebook has like tons of these women, and for each one, it's a different experience. Each John is a different experience. And like Ckiara said, they have the regulars, and then they have the random new guys. So it's like a complete new learning experience every single time, but you have to enter it with more than just thinking that this is like working at McDonald's. It's like, the activity of your sacral chakra, it's right below your navel, and that is from where the sexual energy emanates. So that is our creative power. So why is prostitution such an abuse of the feminine? It's because this touch has become toxic, and women are not realizing what they're doing. They're exchanging energy just for money, a lot of them, and they're not preparing themselves to get into this. For most, it's actually, I have to do it because there's no other way. It's
Tina, but
not.
surely, Tina, I'm sorry to cut across you, but surely what you've just described isn't prostitution at all. This is not, I mean, I've never been in prostitution, so I'm speaking to it from that position, but it's from everything that I've heard from every woman, even those that actually would say that working in prostitution was way better than other jobs they'd had. And usually McDonald's is the job that's cited as something it's better than, so the bar is pretty low. But this exchange...
Can I just make a, I wasn't comparing it to McDonald's. I was
No,
saying,
not you.
I was saying that the stigma is not there, so therefore these people speak up for themselves. There's a lot of people that don't speak up for themselves because they already feel they're doing something dirty.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely, Ckiara. I absolutely, really, that came across loud and clear. And speaking to something that Tina said about the women not giving their spiritual energy, and they have to prepare themselves so it's not like a mundane job. The women want anything but giving any more of themselves than their body for the one-sided sexual pleasure of the man. They don't want a spiritual exchange with the John. They want to keep as much of themselves as possible back, as possible. And this seems to be a universal experience. And forgive me, I'm not speaking to it from a position of having been involved, but it's something that I've been told repeatedly by women from every walk of life within the sex trade. The spiritual exchange you're talking about, Tina, with respect, is a mutual relationship on a higher plane than a man having sex with a woman for cash. And this isn't about her being not good at her job. It's about her holding back as much as she possibly can from that exchange.
Yeah, that's what I mean now. That's why modern prostitution has become such a toxic system where a lot of women just go in for the quick cash. That was my point.
Yes, that's the point. And that's the point I also want to make. Okay, I understand it from that point, but there is, again, and I'm going to say it again, you can't blame the sex, and you can't always blame the client, and you can't really blame, there's no blame in this. There is the indoctrination that we have, that we need to be working on that. Therefore, the right people will be in this business, and the people who really, really need cash or whatever will be able to find some other way. There are people who are so uneducated, they don't know any better. There are governments who make sure that their people stay uneducated so that they can have their whims and go live lifestyles on the rich and famous off the taxes that these poor people are making. If we want to really work with this, we need to work on this what's this head of state immunity bullshit that they have out there, because head of state immunity allows these people to ruin their economies. They ruin their economies, and then some idiot, some predator comes in and he's like, I can get a job, and it's not even a predator, sometimes it's their own family. I'm going to take Lucy here, and we're going to go to the United States, and we're going to go make lots of money. She'll send money back home. Okay, guess what? She's been sold into trafficking. Why has she been sold into trafficking? Because she wouldn't choose, nobody chooses to leave home, whether it's the economy of the home. No one wants to leave their house. No one wants to leave their home. If we're going to fix this, we need to put it's not really blame so much, but the root of the problem. We need to get to the root of the problem if we really want to fix this, because the root of the problem for those people is economy. The root of the economy, and the problem with the economy is the government, who are getting away with all kinds of things while we concentrate our thoughts, and academics and people with influence concentrate on something as mundane as a person's choice to what they want to do with their bodies, while they're sitting up there creating mass hunger and genocide and mass destruction. That's, you know, if we can all come together and take out what's really important and make sure that we see them, we see what you're doing with our world. It is not the world of the wealthy. It's not the world, because without us buying their products, they are nothing. They may manufacture, they may create, they may invent, but if the consumer is not there, they are nothing. So that is the problem. Those are the real problems. What we're talking on now is a wonderful thing, but we need to take away so much focus on prostitution and clients and even brothels, or even, because all these things are created because of two things: religion, no, three things: religion, the stigmatizing of the feminine, and what is hers, the embodiment of the female. We don't see a bunch of legislation against men selling their bodies on street corners when they're at Home Depot, or they're vagabonds on the street. They're on the corner, and then you see a woman on the corner. She is, her strength, her natural, you know, her natural thing that she could trade. Men can trade their strength for work. So what's the difference when a woman is not, no one's going to pick her up off the corner, go lift the refrigerator or go hammer some lumber. They're going to pick her up because of her inherent strength, which is her sexuality, or the feminine sexuality. And that's a fact. That's it.
Although I would say that also has to do with what we were talking about earlier in terms of being products of our culture. I think men can have an inherent sexuality as well, and men could definitely be in what Tina's talking about. I don't think prostitution always needs to be sacred. I don't think that, I mean, I think it can be helpful for people if they can enter into a sacred space, if that's what they want to do, and they can join in energies. But I think that's also an ideological perspective on prostitution, or, you know,
of course, an unrealistic one as where we stand today. But I mean, we have to still talk about this. We still have to bring it into conscious awareness that sexuality is not something dirty. Look at what they made of Mary Magdalene. Today is Mary Magdalene's birthday, and she's the patron saint of whores as we speak. So, you know, whatever work we are doing, it's in some way divinely guided. We are just mouthpieces of the divine, speaking different, divine feminine, speaking different points of views and trying to come together. So it's really very precious to even have this conversation, because there are women who are not in a position to have this conversation. So,
right.
you know.
Ckiara, I agree with you. There are these huge issues that we have to address, and I appreciate you bringing us back to those. I think that it's really hard because we are primarily talking about prostitution here, and I come back to just the everyday people who are engaging. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I think that one of the challenges, and this also comes from my work with, which I haven't talked about and I don't need to go into a lot, with Sex Workers Outreach Project Behind Bars, which is the organization that we started, Alex Andrews and I started in 2016, where we work with incarcerated sex workers and people who are victims of trafficking and people who are convicted traffickers. And so all of this sort of overlay and overlap of what is exploitation and coercion, and we know people who are victims of trafficking who are convicted of trafficking. So there's all kinds of problems here, and what that boils down to in a lot of ways for me is our legislative systems and how we're criminalizing, because people are getting caught up in these huge systemic problems because they have a criminal record. And so I don't mean to come bring it back down. Well, I guess I do mean to bring it back down, because I'm bringing it back down. But when I look at everyday sex workers and the people that I interact with day in and day out, and research and all of this stuff, I'm like, criminalization has a really, especially in the US, I mean, I know it does everywhere, but I'm talking primarily right now from a US perspective, has a huge impact on everybody's everyday lives. In COVID, in Black Lives Matter, in terms of people who are disproportionately looked at and targeted by the police, trans people for violence, for arrest, for all kinds of things. This is a direct impact of criminalization. And I think we can't not talk about that, both in terms of people who are selling and people who are buying. It's both are incredibly problematic. So I just kind of want to bring it back to that briefly.
I completely agree. It's hugely problematic. But one thing that we haven't talked about, and I know that we're running over our time, but I've just realised, is the exploitation, is the facilitation, is the Dennis Hoff type abusers, exploiters, rapists who makes a profit out of women's misery. And we don't have to say that it's every single person in prostitution who meets a Dennis Hoff or who meets a pimp when she's 15, but we know there's a hell of a lot that do. And we're talking about an ugly capitalist business that pre-capitalist, if we really are looking back at matriarchies when women in prostitution were supposedly empowered and spiritual, well, there was no capitalist system then. So actually prostitution didn't need to be a business as it is now. It's a huge exploitative business.
Yes, the women were given a token amount of money. Even when Tinaheals, it was a token, so she would channel the goddess and make love to the men. It was not a fixed amount that she would ask. It was whatever you would offer to the goddess, you know.
Yeah, and
so
well,
yes,
we now have huge business.
History is written by the victors. Remember that.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, and I refuse to. There's a lot of archaeology and archaeological finds that show you matriarchy. Of course, a man's going to say there was never matriarchy, because if you don't know where you've been, you'll be stuck in this present thinking that we were always subservient.
Oh, there was. For instance, if you look at all the carvings on Khajuraho, you will see men and women and orgies and this, beautiful, ecstatic embraces and all of that. So it's like sexuality was always a part of our culture. And because of the English and the Dutch and the Spanish in India colonialism, the connection to sexuality was completely, I would say, divorced in India right now. We are completely polarized about this. Sex is something dirty. Sex is to procreate. Go into the room, turn off the lights, don't take off your clothes. You talk about sex, you're a woman, you're a whore. Right?
Yeah, and a lot of the unrest, sorry, Tina, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to give Julie a chance to talk, and then I wanted to give Jill a chance to talk about swap behind bars. So I'm just gonna put this in. Now I've forgotten what I was gonna say, so go ahead.
You want me to talk or
okay,
Julie,
no,
or
okay, go ahead. No, I want you to go ahead and finish, and then go ahead and let Jill talk, and then I'll let Julie talk. Okay.
So yeah, so it's something dirty. But when we have a woman who's a spiritual lady like Amma, what does Amma do? Amma hugs people. So you immediately see how the feminine touch is healing, and thousands of people queue up to just hug Amma. And she's like, just hugs people. So the feminine touch and the sacred sexuality, they were called Nugig in Sumer, and they were considered to be spotless, undefiled. Even the Vestal virgins, they would own property, and they were not the property of men like the other women, the wives were. So that was also a reason why prostitution became such a taboo topic, because these women were controlling men, controlling their property, controlling money. So I think this segregation and their power, I think that was taken away from them.
Okay. Okay, what I was going to say is, next I want Julie to go ahead and speak, and then we'll have Jill speak. But I wanted to just make this point that we all know, if we are uncomfortable within ourselves, that outwardly We're going to be out, our outward will always be, even when a person parks, you will notice how they park. You know how the person is by the way that they station their car. Maybe they'll park where two cars can park, but they don't give a damn because they're so inflated. But I'm going to tell you something. When you go against your biology, it creates monsters. Serial killers who I've been researching, their number one thing is sexual. Their killings are a misguided sexual. They can't stand their own sexuality, or they can't stand that thing which arouses them, and they've been taught, or society has taught, or their parents have taught, or the church has taught that this is a sin, that sexuality has to be this way, or it's a sin. So people walk around mad at themselves because they have all these feelings and misunderstanding and all this, because there's no talk about recreational sex, even marital sex, even clinical sex. There's no real talk about sexuality. So people walk around angry or feeling ashamed, or just out of place with themselves. They're not secure within themselves about something, like I said, that's biological. And if you don't eat for a while, there's something you're going to order everything in sight, and that's not really what you want. If you don't go to the bathroom, you're going to get sick. It's the same thing with sexuality, and that's what we have in this world, and that's why we have so much self-loathing in this world, especially female to female, or females feeling inside of themselves, because there's something going on inside of them that they're not allowed to explore. So go ahead, Jill. Julie, please, Julie, because then I want Jill to talk about swap incarceration.
Okay, and forgive me, I'm going to have to leave in 10 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll be brief because I want to hear Jill. I don't believe that men commit acts of sexual violence or murder because they have frustrations. I don't believe that men can't keep it in their pants. I don't think that they can't control their sexual urges, and I don't think that they are more murderous than women when they can't get their rocks off and can't have the kind of sex that they want. Otherwise, we'd have as many female serial killers, we'd have as many female sexual violations committed by women. I think that it's about men's entitlement under patriarchy, and I think this is why we have prostitution, whether or not we think that it's okay for the women involved, whether or not we think the men are inherently abusive. It's kind of beside the point in a way. I think we wouldn't have prostitution were it not for patriarchy and misogyny. I think men feel they have a right, and for them it's not particularly an issue that they have sex when the other person is literally laying there like she could be the meat in a McDonald's burger, or whether she's having a good time. And so I want men to take responsibility and stop saying that they can't help it, because they have as much control over their sexual urges and behavior as do women.
In fact, the feminine body is more sexual, because the uterus has just millions of nerve endings from the vagina. So yeah, women are more sexual than men. It's fact.
Yeah, my bringing up the serial killers is because of the sick sense of society, what they bring into their heads and telling them sex is this and sex is that. So therefore, it's okay to kill a sex worker because she's doing a sinful thing anyways. I'm talking about someone with already a sick mind,
Yes.
not your normal everyday guy. Yeah. Go ahead, Julie.
Well, I agree.
I mean, Jill, sorry.
Okay, I agree with you, Julie, and everyone a lot in terms of it's not men do not have this proclivity that women don't have, and I think we definitely need to call that into question. I think for me, aside from looking at these big issues of how we are created by our culture, how our culture creates us, I think that we have to look at, and I guess that's part of the reason why Alex and I started Swap Behind Bars, because we knew being in the sex worker rights movement, as I've been for a long time and a researcher, that people who are incarcerated are disproportionately impacted by the laws, and Swap Behind Bars is limited to the US, so disproportionately impacted by the laws that criminalize prostitution and trafficking, but primarily prostitution when we started. And so we wanted to hear from people who are incarcerated, because we knew that the sex worker rights movement was primarily not being informed by people who are incarcerated. And most of the people, I would say, who are incarcerated didn't even know a sex worker rights movement existed. They didn't know anything about, well, what is a sex worker or whatever, right? So we started back in 2016, basically creating a newsletter and sending it to people who had prostitution and prostitution related charges in the prisons and have had now thousands and thousands of members. So this is not an advertisement for Swap Behind Bars. This is not, if people want to learn more about it, that's totally fine. But what I think has been really impactful for me and has changed my life significantly as a feminist, as an academic, as an activist, as a researcher, as a mother, as so many of these different categories of identity, as that we have a huge problem with our carceral system, with our criminal legal system, obviously, internationally, but the US is at the forefront of being problematic when it comes to that, right? And I think that when we think about prostitution and trafficking, and I don't think that we can talk about one without the other. We can't talk about prostitution without exploitation. I think we have to look at our legislative systems. And within the US, I find that obviously, as we've all agreed, the criminalization of prostitution is a huge problem. I believe strongly that end demand policies, that as what's referred to, the Swedish, whatever, all those different Nordic models that we talk about, is not the solution. I think that decriminalization is, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, basically allows for more voices to come to the forefront, for more people. Amnesty laws that we're now trying to pass, right? Whether it has to do with drug use, whether it has to do with, violence and trafficking. We're trying to pass an amnesty law right now in the city of St. Petersburg so that people can come forward if there's trafficking and exploitation. This is huge. Amnesty is in some ways very closely connected to decrim. You will not be decriminalized for engaging. And in my opinion, clients are at the forefront, can be at the forefront, Johns, whatever you want to call them, at the forefront of identifying exploitative and trafficking conditions. I do not believe that people who are purchasing sex, or the majority of people who are purchasing sex, are out to exploit people. I think that it happens. I think our patriarchal system and our misogynistic system encourages them to, but I do not believe the majority of them do. And by criminalizing clients, we take that whole part away. They cannot go to the authorities and say, something looks wrong here. Something doesn't seem right here. This is a problem. So Swap Behind Bars has just changed a lot of my perspective, because we hear from people day in and day out, thousands and thousands and thousands of letters of people who are currently incarcerated. And it's a gift to me. It's heartbreaking and horrendous. And the fact that these people have lived so many years incarcerated, but it's a gift because it's educating us about how we can make our systems better and stronger. And part of that, I think, is in decriminalization of prostitution.
Thank you. But Julie, you are going to leave us, so go ahead, please.
So I'd like to take a screenshot of everybody. Is that all right?
Sure.
Forgive me for having to leave. I've really got a lot out of speaking with you all, and I'm so glad that we've met, and thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
If you could come back and see us whenever, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I really learned a lot too. And
I learned a lot from you. Yes.
To talk. Thank you, all of you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ckiara.
All right. Thank you so much.
Together, very much.
Okay. Well, I hope we can do this again. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Me too.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay. Wait,
Bye.
Jill.
Okay.
I wanted you to go ahead and give us a little more on Swap Incarcerated, if you please.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sure. What do you want to know? I mean,
Okay, so I want to know how you got started, and then I want to know what people can do to help.
absolutely. Okay, so one of the things that so we started, like I said, back in 2016, we started talking about how I don't have to repeat. Do you want me to say this again?
Yes, please.
So we basically were aware that the people who are incarcerated are obviously disproportionately impacted by the criminalization laws in the US. And again, we're based in the US, so this is just a US organization, although it'd be really interesting to expand into other countries.
Yeah.
Totally open to
That'd
that.
be really good.
That would be
That'd be
great.
really good. If you could do something in India. If you can, there are lots of women incarcerated here.
Yes.
Lots of women.
Talk about that. We should talk about that. It would be really great. So one of the goals was basically just to open up lines of communication. We honestly didn't know, we didn't really have big goals when we started. We were basically like, let's tell people about the sex worker rights movement. So one of the first things we did, we created a newsletter, and we sent it in to people in the prisons, and we talked about Amnesty International, right? And the fact that they advocated for decriminalization of prostitution. And this was really, I think, educational for a lot of people who, one, didn't even know what is a sex worker, and two, didn't know there was a movement, and three, didn't know that people were actually advocating for decriminalization. So it was really interesting. But what's been the most beneficial, in my opinion, is what we've learned from all of the people. So we get letters, we get people requesting that that they're members, and then basically what we ask for, it's sort of like a needs assessment. Like, what is it that you need? Do you need ID? Do you need a place to live? When will you be getting out? You know, do you have the care that you need while you're inside? And it has blown up, right? I want to say that the last estimate, and I'm going to possibly get this wrong, is that we've had 22,000 members over the time that we've done since 2016. And we've got, I mean, tens of thousands of letters that people will send us. And we're doing a better job now of trying to keep track of our members and who they are. We always keep track of them. We know when they're getting out. That's not what I'm saying. We're doing a better job of keeping records and looking at the numbers of like, okay, who are these 22,000 people and what do they have in common and what are their demographics? So that's my job as a researcher, and I'm just now trying to get more involved in that. We actually, and Alex is really the at the forefront of this. When people are getting released, we get notifications. So we keep track of them. We follow them, they're members. So we follow them when they're being moved, when they're being released. We send them a care pack when they get out. We give them a phone if they need it. We send them gift cards, and we send them some toiletries and things like that that they need. And then we also try to create a network. So we try to set them up if they can on Facebook or friends, or this is a community, or we're here for you, right? And so one of there's a lot of different things that's been going on for the last 4 years. We've gotten different people certified in a paralegal program. So there's the Sharmas Outlaw Project that we named after her, where there's a 2-year you can become, it's correspondence course where you can become a certified paralegal, so that when you leave, you are a paralegal. We've done, like, I think 12 scholarships for that. And so there's a lot of different, there's a pen pal program. So you can be a pen pal, which is huge. Getting mail if you're incarcerated is huge, because a lot of people don't get any mail at all. And by sending a letter into the prisons, you're not only sending a message to the guards and the other people that someone is actually aware of you on the outside, that you have a community or a connection, but you're obviously creating this relationship. And we have a lot of people who have pen pals, and then they've continued to talk once they've been released. They've continued to talk to people on the outside, right? So you can sign up and be a pen pal. We have Amazon wish lists where people will tell us, I'm interested in horses, or I need a GED guide, or I need a this and that and the other. And we will get them on the Amazon wish list, and you can go out to Amazon. So if you go to swapbehindbars.org, that's our website, and you can go on Amazon and buy an incarcerated person a book or two or whatever, and it gets sent to them. And then they have whatever that is. And that's based on what they have laid out and said, yes, I want an Amazon wish list and I want these books. So there's a lot of things on the website as well about what you can do in terms of, in addition to donating, right? And right now there's just been such a huge interflux between incarceration, criminalization, sex worker rights, that Swap Behind Bars has kind of been on the forefront of that. And I just want to say that I've learned so much from everyone that has shared all of their wealth of knowledge with us. And so we just try to give back in whatever way is directed by the community.
Thank you for giving back, because there's a lot of people who write and make all these different researches and get honors and all kinds of things, and they forget all about the people they've researched. And I really thank you for that. Go ahead, Tina.
Important. I do want to say really one quick thing. One of the things that we've done in response to COVID, outreach has taken off. So we're doing a lot more, not just with people who are incarcerated, but like in the state of Florida, for instance, we're reaching out to 15 counties. So we're basically giving people condoms, toiletries, hair products, plus needle exchange. So we're doing kind of like a underground unauthorized needle exchange, right? And so this has taken off because we see I know.
I think I might have to cut that out.
I'm not that worried about it because it happens.
Okay.
Florida's laws are changing, so it's not
Okay.
like we're all going to get arrested. It's
Okay, cool.
more important because people with COVID, right, need fresh, clean needles. Like that's important. They need this. So basically, with COVID now, the need has gone up exponentially, and because we've been able to get donations, we've been able to give back, and that's been huge, right? So I just want to say, COVID is incredibly problematic for so many people in sex work, and if we can give back to the communities that most need it, that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jill. You've been so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to
Yeah.
come time.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you. Will you come back?
Absolutely. And I really thought that conversation with Julie was productive. I don't know if anyone had any mind changes throughout the whole thing, but it was good to come together and talk.
I did. No, I think she was wonderful.
So easily.
What?
She is very fixated on a very linear format, and she's not incorrect in the way she's written. She's explained herself. It's just her looking at the other side, which I think is going to be hard. Which Ckiara,
Yeah, but plus
you
she staked her reputation and everything on what she's written. So you can't just expect her to just flip over. You know what I'm saying? But
it's
no,
important to have this conversation with her because incarcerating poor Indian women or poor Nepali girls, it's not an answer. It's not going to help anyone.
Right.
No, it isn't. It's
little seeds of shifting and change, right? So people can just plant seeds of change.
And actually, Julie has written in her book that I'm first a feminist and then a pro-abolitionist. So prove to me that prostitution in any way is beneficial to feminism, and I will accept it. It's
I think we just did. I'm sorry. I really do think we just did. Gave her an answer to quite a few answers to a lot of what she's been thinking. Because I'm still saying you have a billion and billions of dollar industry. You can't tell me that you have researched every sex worker. You cannot base your whole theme.
And she's also talking about people who are pro the movement who receive large donations. But you and me, Ckiara, we don't receive any donations. So
no, we don't. No, we don't. But what I was saying is, you cannot base a research based on a small number of people and then exaggerate it and give it to everybody else, because still neither you as a researcher, neither her as a researcher has enough data from enough sex workers to be able to sit up there and say every sex worker feels this way, because I doubt that she's talked to a million sex workers, maybe hundreds or maybe 100.
I don't know. Like she does investigative journalism, which is very different from doing a research study, right? Where you're basically trying to go in and talk to people. And you're exactly right. You can only speak for this number of people that I've talked to in this area at this time. You can't say carte blanche, this is how things are for all the Johns or all the whatever. You can't say that, right? Like,
right.
I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving us so much time. And I look forward for us to speak to another lady. I forgot her name. I wanted to get in contact with her. The lady with the, like 1,001 Dalmatians. Catherine something?
Emailing about that, but I don't remember.
Catherine, I swear she has a streak up here. That's the only reason I remember her. But anyways, I'm gonna look her up again because I was watching her and she was going on and on about how period, even the privileged women in sex work are also doing it by force. There is no consent and blah, 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 blah. But once you consent to something, it no longer is a one-sided. It no longer is one-sided because you've consented to something. You said this and that. It's no longer one. It's a two-side. It's here. I'm giving you money for this.
Yeah, but Julie does not believe that the consent is from the heart. The consent is because the money's out.
Well,
so
that's
where you are coming from and where she's coming from. And
yeah, but wait. Well, there's one thing. It doesn't always have to be the heart. This is what I'm saying. Recreational sex in itself can be just that, recreational sex. And if a person is saying, here, I'm giving you recreational sex, okay, that's fine, as long as you treat it with respect. There's the sacredness when you treat it with respect. You can't treat,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't treat something you think you're doing is dirty anyways. It's like yesterday, this guy came over and he was trying to make me feel bad for being here. You sure the are you sure the table covering on the massage table, are you sure this is clean? I'm like, I don't know if you're used to going to dirty places, but this isn't it. I'm not going to invite you into my home and put you on dirty linen. And that type of thing. But I could tell that that's what that was coming from, him making himself feel better, or trying to make it okay for him to come visit me. And I even spoke to him about it, and by the time he left, he had a different energy, but he did come in with some heavy energy, which is what Tina's talking about. We do need to have a school that trains these ladies, and in order to do that, we have to decriminalize it so that we can establish these places for these ladies and gentlemen and whomever are in the sex industry, in the yes, and prepare them for that.
Right, right, right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really good to talk with you both.
Okay. All
Really
right,
good.
you have
Yes.
a beautiful, beautiful day.
All right, you guys have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Right.
Take care.
It makes it more interesting. Just that we four had this conversation, four different ladies from four different worlds
Hmm.
coming together. This is what I celebrate as a woman. That,
Right.
us being able to come together, you and me so far away, just being able
Right.
to talk. This is crazy. I'm with you. I told you that I'm with you
I'm,
on this.
I'm
But
with you.
we have to do something for, if you can, I'll send you some videos, like if you know any place. And then lot of prostitutes with no money right now in Kamathipuram and Sonargachi. They have no food and nothing. So somehow, I don't know. I mean, if you know any
Okay.
organization
Okay.
in the post-COVID world, the most affected are the sex workers. And I don't mean the high class escorts or the high class call girls. I mean women who live in Sonargachi and Kamathipuram. I watched a video, and the sex workers, it was a viral video by the Quaint on YouTube, and the sex workers are not getting any money. They don't have any food. They don't have any know-how of how they will make money tomorrow. So if you can, please donate directly to the women of Kamathipuram, Sonargachi, and other big areas where low-income women sell sex. Thank you. Now, I'll do Hindi. रिसेंटली मैंने क्विंट में एक वीडियो देखा जहां सोनारगाछी कामाथीपुरम के लेडीज बहुत ही मुश्किल में हैं, क्योंकि कोविड के बाद उनके पास कोई कस्टमर नहीं है, खाना नहीं है, और कोई भी सिक्योरिटी सेफ्टी नहीं है। तो प्लीज उनके लिए अगर आप कुछ डोनेट कर सकते हैं तो प्लीज डोनेट कीजिए। अगर आप खुद जा सकते हैं तो खुद चले जाइए और उनकी सहायता कीजिए। थैंक यू। नाउ इन बंगाली, सो या
Yes, go ahead.
কামাতিপুরাম, সোনারগাছি, এগুলি নাম নিশ্চয়ই শুনেছেন। এখানে প্রচুর প্রচুর মহিলারা থাকেন যারা যৌন বিক্রি করেন, এবং আজকে কোভিড এর পরে তাদের কাছে কোনো কাস্টমার নেই, তাদের কাছে খাবার নেই, তাদের কাছে গ্যাস অব্দি কেনার কোনো উপায় নেই। তো যদি পারেন কিছু ডোনেট করুন, যদি পারেন ওখানে চলে যান, সাহায্য করুন, কেননা এই মহিলারা আপনাদের, আমাদের বোন, আমাদের মা, আমাদের সব। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you.
We are so tied up in our minds that we've lost our senses.
I use the word think. Talking to yourself. Subvocal conversation.
Thank you for joining us here at Ckiara Nation. We are a platform for sex, sexuality, politics, and all its genres. This platform was made for people to be able to speak openly about their feelings, about sexuality, and all that goes with it. People may not think that sexuality is very important, but let me tell you something. I'm going to conclude this letting you know this. Sexuality is at the forefront of who we are as human beings. This is who we are. We are sexual beings, not just for procreation. That's something that came in with the Abrahamic and Islamic religions. Now, I've put together a little bit of history to help prove my point. It's a little bit of research, and you can do your own research. After the rise of Abrahamic and Islamic patriarchal ideology, that is the religion where religion and government came together, and capitalism also became a factor. Capitalism was really the product of Europeans' lack of natural resources within their continents. So therefore, when they went out and looked out to other continents, they brought with them their shame, their ideology, and forced it down many people's throats. But even they weren't always like that. Homosexuality, sexual individualism became explicitly prohibited after Christianization around the 12th century. In the mid 14th century, the general faith condemned the pleasures of the flesh, but in practice, the customs remain the same, so people fucked anyways. During the 14th century, the Black Death spread all across Europe and killed 25 million people. No one knew the cause for this disease. Henceforth, to this day, family values and customs and the good religious conduct came in its place. To today, it became a culture. During the 14th century, at the time of the Black Death, they started persecuting women, Jews. They were overthrowing the Moors, the heretics, the Sodomites, which were considered people in homosexual relationships. LBGT has been with us from the beginning of time to the end. Anyways, to finish off on that part, on the 14th century, they came to believe that the Black Death came from these people indulging in these activities. Or someone took it, had the brilliant idea, who was thinking outside the box and wanted their ideology fixed. So they fed the masses, the public, that there was these people that created these problems. And so there was no other solution than the eradication of these groups, and the practice continues today. The only problem with that practice about people who were promiscuous or had same gender intercourse or loose women, as they call them, was that men would have no outlet, and then the women and wives would be in danger. So they made this little recognition of prostitutes who were recognized but were the example for women of virtue to not be like them. But most prostitutes were still, basically, it's the way they made their money in that part of Europe. In Europe, period. Sorry. So I'm going to go on and explain to you a few little things that I find that it's important that you know. Now, in Indian culture, Shiva and Parvati were androgynous composites of Shiva and his wife Parvati. The form originated when Parvati, desiring to share Shiva's experience, asked for their forms to literally be joined. What is being said is that if the inner masculine and the feminine meet, you are a perpetual state of ecstasy. This was explained by the scholar Sadhguru. Then in Kama Sutra, the Kama Sutra talks about same-sex relations, that metaphysics is a world where all manifestations of the divine are set to exist. There is space not only for men and women, but also for men with a woman's heart and women with a man's needs. Masculinity and femininity are only labels that are applied to bodies being occupied by the eternal souls. Now, in pre-Christian Africa, the Eshu contains female feminine paths. Ogundipe states that Eshu, at once both male and female, although his masculinity is depicted as visually and graphically overwhelming, his equally expressive female renders his enormous sexuality ambiguous, contrary, and genderless. Eshu indeterminacy sits at the heart of the Yoruba interpretation. Eshu's presence at the gates of consciousness is essentially queer. Okay, I want to get on with this because I know you guys have things to do, but it's very important for you guys to understand that sex work, as they call it now, whores, which the word whore itself means beloved ones. That's where the word first derived from. And what was happening is that these women were free, as you heard, Tina, and they owned property and they did all kinds of things, but they were also used in the forming of treaties. They were also why treaties were made in between kingdoms. They had children for influential men and kings and so forth, so their children would be protected. But they also were part of the government in different places. Islam wasn't always Islam the way it is. Muhammad had his sergeants or whatever. One of them was Khalid, I believe, go and destroy goddess temples, which is what Arabs used to have, goddesses. It wasn't always this whole gender hate, because that's all it is gender hate. When you oppress another human being who is a thinking, feeling human being, who by God, goddess, that one, what I am, that I am, or any other thing that is omnipotent, has made everything perfect and whole as it is. It is us human beings with our ideologies. That includes mine. But mine is more based on what I'm seeing around me in my present day. It's that we're too bent up on determining people and classifying people by their sexuality rather than their spirit. Native Americans, they had same-sex marriage. They had 2, 3, 5 gender people who they recognized, who they revered, as the priestesses were revered. All of sexuality has been turned inside out. And fear is being driven on people. If you want to think outside this box, you're going to go be damned. Be damned to what? Are you happy within yourself? Are you really happy within yourself? In your constant state, are you happy inside your skin? Because if you are, you wouldn't be transgressing or bothered by what someone else does. But where you see oppression, you should end it. If you really want to make this world a better place, we need to embrace all our sex and sexuality and what it is, and start stripping away all this negativity, all this hate, all this fear. There's nothing to fear. That is where all things stem from. Even when you plug a plug into a socket, it doesn't have life. It doesn't have productivity. It's of no use unless things connect. Everything has a connection. Everything connects, even if it's flat. It's still connected. They still become one. And hoping that you guys enjoyed this show and that you learned something. I appreciate very much that Julie went ahead and came on, and I learned a lot from her. I hope that Jill will come back also. I learned a lot from her. And I hope that Tina, it's not I hope, she said she will return. And she will return with me from time to time as my guest hostess. So, that's all I'm going to share right now. I just thought it was really important for me to give a little editorial, or whatever you want to call it. Thank you very much. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, or just ingest and give me a call or a email if you wish. All right, I've wasted I haven't wasted your time. I've taken enough of your time. I appreciate you. And thank you. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye.
Of us would have rather money than tangible wealth, and a great occasion is somehow spoiled for us unless photographed. And to read about it the next day in the newspaper is oddly more fun for us than the original event.
If you talk all the time,
This is a disaster,
never hear what anybody else has to
for as a result of confusing the real world of nature with mere signs, we are destroying nature.
say.
We are so tied up in our minds